I'd be curious in both of your senses about this. I think with all the progress that has been made, which we should acknowledge, and both of you have clearly contributed to this, I think the pandemic has in many ways accelerated some of the inequities and has really shown a light on the fact how quickly and how fragile our progress is. If I just look at from the Cengage perspective, what we have seen over the last 12 months is a very uneven development of college enrollments for Black and brown students and lower income students relative to average other students. Significant declines in enrollment there. And I know, Michael, you see some of the same numbers in your system. It is a cause of grave concern for me, for the society at large, not only the education system. Michael, maybe starting with you on this one, what do you think is the most pressing problem right now, given COVID and the overlay of that?
Well, I think that you're absolutely right. The progress has been fragile, and I worried from the very beginning of COVID, even before we saw the inequitable, disparate impact it was having on Black and brown communities, that we ran the risk of losing a whole generation of Black students. I'm focused on Black college students, but I was at a KIPP charter school board meeting yesterday, and we know that this is affecting students at every point along the education trajectory. So we're seeing, Black and brown low-income students in public schools not getting the educational opportunities that their more privileged peers are getting. We're seeing Black college students enrollment, particularly in community college, drop by double digits. One of the things that I can say gives me a glimmer of hope is that in historically Black colleges, the decline in enrollment has been less than 10%, largely because we were very proactive as a community in addressing some of these concerns. But we're already seeing across all of higher education, except the most elite and privileged institutions, we're seeing declines in applications. And I think that, this is another consequence, that we're going to see progress in expanding educational opportunity to Black and brown, low income, but all people, is going to be taking a real kick in the gut as a result of COVID.
Alex, from your perspective, I mean, you're seeing it day to day, interacting with students as well. What do you see as the major impact right now of the COVID pandemic?
I think it's exactly what both of you have already talked about, right? We're seeing these significant declines in enrollment. According to the National Student Clearinghouse, for the class of 2020, college enrollment, plummeted by 22% overall compared with 2019. And then more than 33% for graduates of high poverty high schools, right? As Dr. Lomax was just talking about. And I think the number that is particularly alarming, again, that both of you have alluded to, is the decline in enrollment at community colleges. I think in past years, when there's been an economic downturn, our community colleges have been the engines, right, of fueling economic growth. And we've seen in the past, right, the community college enrollment goes up as folks think about reskilling, as folks are leaving the workplace, but that's not what we've seen this year. As Dr. Lomax said, we've seen a 10% decline. And so that's really alarming. And I think the biggest challenge for us now is, how do we ensure that these short-term declines, or that these declines that we're seeing, do not permanently, right, result in derailing our students, particularly our students who are most vulnerable, our Black and brown students, our students from under-resourced communities. Because these challenges amount to more than just a series of individual tragedies. Like we have, through the coaching that we're doing with students, we have individual stories, but they represent the lost economic mobility for young people and their families, and potentially the progress of an entire generation. So there just has never been a more important time for us to focus on equity and focus on redesigning, because we risk losing significant populations of our students.
You know, if I
Yeah.
could just add a little bit to that, you know, I think the question is, why is it that in this economic decline, people aren't, you know, immediately rushing off to get reskilled and upskilled? It is, I think there are a couple of reasons. Number one is they're having to work.
Yeah.
They're having to work. They're having to take, you know, whatever job they can find to keep food on the table, to keep, you know, a roof over their heads. And what we're hearing back from our students is they are trying to they are now breadwinners for their families because older family members are ill or dying at the worst of the pandemic. They're also caregivers for younger siblings because children are at home. They're not. So there's just a lot that's happening that is really making it hard to be a student. And that for so many people, low income, first generation Black folks, they don't have access to Wi-Fi and they don't have access to to devices that enable them to remain in school and to balance, you know, work and getting an education. You know, they some of them, all they have is a cell phone, and they're taking courses on a cell phone. So, you know, I think that the degree of difficulty has just gotten way bigger. And, you know, I think that we're going to have to look to all hands on deck in this country to address this, both in terms of helping these people, these young people, get the educations they need, but also delivering education in ways which enable them to take advantage of it without maybe always being in a classroom, but having the capability to do this technologically.
Yeah, and I want to pick up on this point, Michael, because I think it is so critical. You mentioned it will require an all-out national effort. This is not about, you know, tweaking things here and there. This will require an effort, and Alex, you referenced the numbers. I mean, the declines are massive. I mean, it is truly, as you said, Michael, there's a risk of losing an entire generation here. This is not a risk of, you know, a drop here and there. How do you know, and the other thing I just want to state around this is I do believe that the education system, all of us need to challenge ourselves also to make it easier for students to access the system. And that has a lot to do for me with affordability. It has a lot to do with a rigid system. We ask people to enroll for a certain period of time, then you get a degree, etc. And I think technology now affords us to be actually a lot more flexible and do things in smaller increments. Give people certificates as opposed to giving them, you know, a degree, and that will help them to get a better job. So I do think we have a challenge for all of us, and I want to pivot it to those practical solutions, but I don't want to move on without elaborating a little bit on the point of an all-out national effort. And I would love for both of you to comment on, to the extent that we have seen things come out of the new Biden administration, how do you judge it? What is your sense of what the new administration, as the federal administration, is doing? Does it make sense? Doesn't it make sense? And Michael, you wrote I thought, an extremely thoughtful piece in the Atlantic a few days ago. And I'd love, again, to start with you. Sort of, what's your sense? Are we at the cusp of an all national effort, or are we going to go down into sort of piecemealing it?
Well, I think that the Biden administration is sort of learning from the mistakes. I want to be careful how I say this, of the Obama administration. You know, Obama came in at a really low point in the economy, and he chose healthcare as a solve. And it's been a divisive issue, a very important one, but a divisive issue. And there was a lot of talk at that time about, well, shouldn't he have had a Public Works Act? You know, and shouldn't he have invested in job training and job placement? I believe that what you're going to see after this, the first thing that the Biden administration is doing is crisis management on the disease, get everybody a vaccine. And on the stimulus, they're saying stabilize. And that's what I think they're doing by giving money to people, allowing them to stay in their homes, giving them the wherewithal to pay, for food and the things they need. But I think right behind that, Michael, is there. I'm hearing that there will be something like a $3 trillion Public Works Act. And that Public Works Act is a jobs act. And it's gonna be a job training act, because the people who will need to get those jobs will need retraining. But the skills, they're not going to be brick masons, and they're not going to be, doing manual labor. They're going to be using, they're going to need rudimentary technological capabilities. They're going to have to be upskilled for the 21st century, not for the 20th century. Absolutely. And so I really do think that this is an opportunity for education to say, we're all in. And maybe folks aren't going to be getting, a straight line from a freshman year to a bachelor's degree, but they could be building stackable credentials that will be part of a maybe longer term getting from being a high school graduate to having a solid post-secondary set of credentials that enable them to earn a good living in the 21st century. And so I see there's a big role for education. There's a big role for job training and upskilling. And we're just going to have to say that, again, all of higher education has got to play at this. And because otherwise we're going to lose our prominence as the global leader in the economy of the world.
No question about it. And I can just add, a data point from our perspective. And as you guys are getting more and more into the Cengage business, that we have an online skills business, which does exactly this, what you are just describing, giving people for like $1,500 a course, giving them something tangible, either in medical coding or in, HVAC technicians or in, computer programming, that they can take literally to the bank. They can take to an employer and say, here, I have a skill that is relevant and that is tied to what you're actually looking for. And Alex, from your perspective, are you seeing the same thing in the demand with the students that you're working with? Are you seeing that ask coming through of more flexibility and give me something that is stackable and helps me get a job?
Absolutely. And this has been a trend. And I, again, will agree with everything that Dr. Lomax has said in terms of really focusing on upskilling, really focusing on a better connection, particularly between our community colleges and workforce, right? Trying to give our students more hands-on practical experiences as they're earning their credentials and also as they're earning their degrees, right? I think that's an important component of what we're seeing, what we're hearing for students. That's on the one hand. I think on the other hand, we actually need employers, right, to move to become skills-based and degree agnostic, because we keep talking about this degree agnostic utopia that we're moving into. But so many of employers are still using these old standards, right? It is still about the sort of exclusivity of the institution that you attended, still about asking questions about the GPA, that you were able to achieve. And so I see this tension and this friction, right? That like on the demand side, like absolutely, I think our students are asking for more flexibility. I think we need to think about, just different skills and different pathways for our students. But we got to change that on the other side as well. And employers have to change their recruiting systems to reward, this kind of skills-based approach. And until we do that and we combine the two, I fear that we are going to sort our Black and Brown students, right, into these sort of skills-based pathways and not have those skills have genuine economic value, right, in the market where employers are actually making hiring decisions based on those skills. I think the other thing that I would add to the equation, just in terms of the Biden administration, I think jobs and affordability, jobs is definitely a key thing. I would also suggest that we continue to focus on affordability, right? Systems like FAFSA and Pell Grants and Federal Work Study were created to address unequal access to higher education, but the systems have become cumbersome for administrators, unclear for students and parents, and it's making it difficult for the aid that we do have to be delivered where it's most needed. So I would recommend continuing to focus on the other end as well, simplifying the pathways to federal aid, making college costs transparent for students and parents, and then ensuring equitable distribution of higher education resources. I think there's a real opportunity for the administration to focus on those aspects of it as well.
Yeah, you know, on the access side of this, we're pushing, and I've been pushing this for the last 3 years, doubling the Pell Grant. I mean, it's just, you know, just that's not there does have to be reform to the borrowing, but for so many of the people that we're very focused on, taking a Pell Grant from $6,000 to $13,000 will make a huge difference. And then I would just say on the employer side, you know, I think that we're beginning to see that there's competency-based assessment. I mean, they're starting to say, you know, I have a daughter who is an engineer, and she dropped out of college because she felt she had the competencies that were required, and nobody asked to see where's your degree. They gave her a coding assignment, and if she could do it elegantly and on time, she got a job. And I do think that there's going to be more of that. And I think people are going to be, you know, some people are just going to be a little bit surprised that that degree that they spent $100,000 on is not going to get them the job that they would like to have today.
And I think the people are surprised and actually have been surprised for a while, right? I mean, one of the statistics I love to cite is we have 10 million unemployed, countless underemployed, and 6 million job openings.
Yeah.
What's wrong with that equation, right? Something doesn't fit in this equation. And I do think it is exactly what you're saying, that the skill sets that a degree used to signal is not necessarily there from an employer perspective, and employers need to be more flexible. And I'm speaking as, you know, leading one of those employers. We have about 4,500 people around the world, 3,000 in the US. We constantly have job openings, and we are guilty as charged, Alex, to your point, to traditionally have a very rigid system. You got to have these degrees, etc., but not really doing the hard work of defining what does this role really require, and can we have an assessment like, Michael, your daughter got, that will get us access to a completely different labor pool and allow us to fill the job quicker than we did before. So I think it is really back to this is a joint responsibility. We can only reform the system if everybody takes responsibility, and what we shouldn't be doing is pointing fingers of who does things or whatever, which unfortunately happens, you know, often, that people are always looking at the other side of the equation or the other side of the people. But I do think employers are starting to take it seriously. I see companies like Google, like Amazon, taking a very different approach to this. But I think it's important that we also acknowledge it has to happen fast, because it can't be that we are on this 10-year journey of everybody reevaluating the risk. I mean, what stuck with me from our conversation most so far has been the conversation about a generation lost. And if we're losing a generation of Black and brown students, if we're losing a generation of students with lower income families living in the Midwest, etc., and have them permanently under or unemployed, I think we're not only, I would argue, we're not only losing our place in the global economy, I would say we're starting to lose the cohesion of our society.